October 14th, 2019, 11:47. A kitchen lit only by the refrigerator door left slightly open. The hum of the motor fills the silence. A glass of water rests untouched in your hand. In the other room, your phone screen glows with a message you haven't answered. Are you upset with me? You stare at it longer than necessary. Once you would have replied immediately. You would have explained your tone, clarified your pause, softened your boundaries so no one mistook them for rejection. But tonight something is different. The air feels heavier, not tense, just settled, as if a decision has already been made somewhere beneath language. You close the refrigerator door. Darkness returns to the room. And without drama, without anger, you place the phone face down on the counter. This is the moment no one sees. Not the argument, not the confrontation, not the dramatic goodbye. Just the quiet refusal to translate yourself again. There is a subtle shift that happens in adulthood. It rarely announces itself. There's no ceremony, no declaration. Warmth becomes selective. Not withdrawn, guarded. From the outside, it looks like distance, like indifference, like emotional cooling. But from the inside, it feels like preservation. Jungian psychology suggests that as the persona matures, it no longer survives by being accessible to everyone. In youth, accessibility is currency. We explain ourselves to remain loved. We overclarify to avoid abandonment. We adjust tone, volume, even personality so others feel comfortable staying. But something changes when the inner self grows stronger than the need to be perceived correctly. You stop performing emotional transparency for reassurance. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel compelled to defend your existence. Earlier in life, misunderstandings felt urgent. If someone thought you were distant, you rushed to correct it. If someone misread your silence, you filled it. If someone questioned your loyalty, you overproved it. You believed love required constant clarification. And perhaps at the time it did. But maturity rearranges that belief quietly. Now when someone says you've changed, you don't immediately scramble to reassure them. You pause. You consider whether the change is actually growth. And sometimes you let the misunderstanding remain. That's when people begin calling you cold. Cold is an easy label. It simplifies what they don't understand. You don't laugh as loudly. You don't volunteer personal details as quickly. You don't answer texts with emotional paragraphs anymore. Your words are measured now, intentional. You have learned the cost of oversharing your interior. Not everyone deserves entry. That realization alone can feel like betrayal to those who benefited from your openness. But inside, something steadier is forming. An internal sovereignty. And sovereignty is often misinterpreted as isolation. Think back to a time when you overextended yourself emotionally. When you stayed on the phone long after exhaustion set in. When you explained your boundaries 5 different ways. When you apologized for needing space. There was a quiet resentment underneath, wasn't there? Not toward them but toward yourself. Because somewhere, you knew you were abandoning your own limits to maintain connection. The persona was working overtime. Jungian psychology suggests the persona is a social mask, necessary, adaptive, even beautiful in its function. But when overused, it drains the psyche. And exhaustion eventually forces honesty. Not loud honesty, but structural honesty. You begin removing access. The transformation doesn't feel triumphant. It feels lonely. The first time you choose silence instead of explanation, your chest tightens. The first time you don't clarify a misunderstood text, you feel exposed. The first time you allow someone to walk away without chasing them, you tremble afterward. Because this is new territory. You are not used to being misunderstood on purpose. There's grief in that. A subtle mourning for the version of you who would have done anything to be seen correctly. But there is also relief. Relief in not negotiating your emotional bandwidth. Relief in not translating every internal shift into digestible language. Relief in not being endlessly reachable. Hard to reach. That phrase carries weight. It implies effort is required now. Access is no longer automatic. And that unsettles people. Especially those who are accustomed to your constant availability. They may test it. Are you mad at me? Why are you so distant lately? You used to be different. You feel the pull to revert, to soften, to over-explain. But something steadier holds you in place. You are not angry. You are conserving. This is not about punishment. It's about containment. When warmth becomes selective, it is not because love disappeared, it is because discernment arrived. You are learning that intimacy without boundaries becomes depletion. And depletion eventually becomes bitterness. You chose the earlier exit. You chose the quieter route. You chose to become difficult to access rather than easy to consume. But here is the tension no one talks about. What if, in protecting what feels sacred, you also risk being alone? And that question lingers in the dark kitchen long after the phone screen fades. Because becoming hard to reach doesn't just change how others see you. It changes how you see yourself. And you're not entirely sure yet who that person is becoming. The next morning, 6:12 a.m., the city hasn't fully woken yet. A pale gray light stretches across the ceiling. The room is quiet in a way that feels almost deliberate, as if the world is giving you space to think. Your phone is still face down on the counter. No apology sent, no clarification offered. There's a strange calm in that. But beneath it, something unsettled. You didn't become cold overnight. You didn't wake up one day and decide to retreat from the world. This was gradual. 1,000 small moments of overextension. 1,000 subtle betrayals of your own limits. 1,000 times you said it's fine when it was. Sovereignty rarely begins with empowerment. It begins with exhaustion. At first, the shift is barely noticeable to others. You still show up. You still care. You still listen. But something internal recalibrates. You stop offering explanations before they're requested. You stop volunteering emotional access on impulse. You stop filling silence just to reduce tension. And the silence stretches. That stretch is where loneliness begins to echo. Because when you remove the constant output, the reassuring messages, the emotional labor, the smoothing of rough edges, you realize how much of your connection was built on your availability. Not always on reciprocity. That realization is sobering. Jungian psychology suggests that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires withdrawing projections from others. In simple terms, it means you stop shaping yourself around how you're perceived. But when you stop shaping yourself, relationships shift. Some deepen. Some dissolve. Some reveal they were never anchored in your authenticity to begin with. And that's where the ache lives. Not in losing people, but in recognizing that parts of you were only loved when they were convenient. You begin noticing subtle reactions. Conversations become shorter. Invitations become less frequent. Certain people stop confiding in you. Not because you did something wrong, but because you no longer play the role they were accustomed to. You used to absorb emotional storms, now you observe them. You used to offer endless reassurance, now you offer measured presence. You used to be immediately reachable. Now you are deliberate. And deliberateness can feel like rejection to someone who thrives on immediacy. The loneliness of this stage is unique. It's not the dramatic isolation of being abandoned. It's the quiet isolation of standing firm. No one is attacking you. No one is leaving in flames. They're simply adjusting. And you feel the distance widening in slow motion. There are nights when you question yourself. Am I becoming detached? Am I losing my softness? Have I confused growth with withdrawal? These questions surface because sovereignty feels unfamiliar. It lacks the validation that constant accessibility once provided. When you are always reachable, you are needed. When you are selective, you are respected, but less relied upon. And the ego misses being indispensable. That's the shadow few talk about. You once derived identity from being emotionally essential. The one who understood everyone. The one who stayed late. The one who could be called at any hour. That role fed something inside you. Now that you've stepped back, you confront the emptiness that role once filled. Who are you when you're not managing others' emotional climates? Who are you when you're not smoothing conflict? Who are you when you stop proving your warmth? The answers don't arrive immediately. They unfold slowly, often in silence. One evening, you sit across from someone who says, "You seem different lately." The words aren't hostile, just observant. You notice the old reflex rise to explain your inner evolution in detail, to soften their discomfort with your changes. But you don't. You hold eye contact. And you say, "I've been quieter." Nothing more. There is power in that restraint. Not defensive, not dismissive. Just contained. You can feel it in your body, the steadiness of not overextending. This is new strength. But strength carries weight. Sovereignty requires tolerating misinterpretation. That may be the hardest part. You are no longer desperate to correct every narrative about you. If someone believes you're distant, you allow it. If someone assumes you've changed for the worse, you let the assumption stand. Because explaining yourself repeatedly once felt like survival. Now it feels like self-erasure. There's a maturity in accepting that not everyone will update their perception of you. Some will cling to an outdated version. Some will resent the new boundaries. And some will quietly step away. The question becomes, can you tolerate being misunderstood without collapsing into self-doubt? There are moments, usually late at night, when the old accessibility calls to you. It whispers, "Reach out, fix it, reassure them, be easy again." And for a second you almost do. Because being reachable meant being loved visibly. Being hard to reach means trusting that the right connections will withstand space. That trust is terrifying. It feels like standing at the edge of a dock, unsure whether the water will hold you. But something deeper than fear keeps you steady. An emerging sense of identity that no longer depends on constant emotional exchange. The strange truth is this. You are not colder. You are more concentrated. Your warmth hasn't disappeared. It has become intentional. It is offered where there is depth, where there is reciprocity, where there is emotional safety. And that filtration process inevitably reduces numbers. Fewer conversations, fewer confessions, fewer shallow dynamics, but greater clarity. Still, clarity doesn't cancel loneliness. There is a season where growth feels like isolation before it feels like alignment. And you are standing in that season now. But hear what makes this transformation irreversible. For the first time, your peace feels more important than being easily understood. And once that shift locks into place, there is no going back to effortless accessibility. The only question left is, what happens when someone finally meets you at this new depth? February 2nd, 2021, 8:38 p.m. A quiet corner table by a rain-streaked window. The cafe is nearly empty, low light, ceramic cups clink softly behind the counter. Across from you sits someone new. They don't rush to fill the silence. They don't probe when you pause. They don't interpret your restraint as rejection. And for a moment, you feel something unfamiliar. Not pressure. Recognition. In the past, connection often began with performance. You offered stories quickly, personal history, emotional transparency as proof of sincerity. Vulnerability became your entry ticket. Now you speak slower. You let conversation breathe. You reveal pieces of yourself the way one opens a door carefully, not to test the other person but to protect what lives inside. And something surprising happens. They lean in. Not because you are accessible, but because you are anchored. This is the quiet reward of becoming hard to reach. You begin attracting those who are not intimidated by interiority. Those who don't require constant reassurance to feel secure. Those who understand that silence is not absence, it is depth gathering itself. From a Jungian perspective, individuation reshapes attraction. When the self strengthens internally, it stops chasing dynamics that confirm insecurity. Instead, it resonates with stability. But resonance takes time. And time filters out the restless. The person across from you asks a question. Not about what you do. Not about who you know. But about what you've learned recently about yourself. There's no urgency in their voice. No hunger to dissect you. Just curiosity. You pause before answering. And for the first time, your pause doesn't feel defensive. It feels chosen. You share something measured, something real. Not everything. Just enough. And they don't demand more. That restraint feels like respect. This is where you realize something critical. You didn't become hard to reach to push people away. You became hard to reach, so only those capable of depth would stay. Accessibility once expanded your social circle. Selective warmth now deepens it. There is a difference between being surrounded and being understood. You used to settle for the former. Now you wait for the latter. Still, the transition is not seamless. Even in this cafe, even in this moment of resonance, a flicker of doubt moves through you. What if this quiet version of me is too much? What if depth feels heavy over time? What if I am slowly disappearing from the world? Old fears don't vanish instantly, they resurface in whispers. But notice something. You don't abandon yourself to silence those fears anymore. You don't overperform charm to secure connection. You remain steady. That steadiness is new, and it changes the atmosphere around you. There is a gravity to someone who no longer needs to be constantly validated. People feel it. Some interpret it as aloofness. Others recognize it as integration. Carl Jung believed that as individuals integrate more of their unconscious material, they become less reactive to external perception. They are not hardened, they are consolidated. Consolidation can look like distance from afar. But up close, it feels like presence without urgency. You are no longer scanning the room for approval. You are inhabiting your space. Fully. Weeks pass. You notice a pattern. The people who remain in your life now initiate with intention. They ask before assuming. They respect pauses. They don't panic when you take hours to respond. They don't weaponize your quiet. These are subtle signs of emotional maturity, not just in you but in them. And for the first time, connection feels less like maintenance and more like alignment. There is less noise, less explanation, less friction. Not because conflict never arises, but because it is handled without drama. You begin to see the architecture of your former accessibility. It was built on speed. Fast replies, fast bonding, fast reassurance. Now your connections are built on packing. Deliberate replies, gradual trust, earned intimacy. It is slower. But slower feels stable. And stability does not need constant display. One evening, alone again, you reflect on the past few years. The kitchen nights. The unanswered messages. The loneliness of holding your ground. You realize something that would have been impossible before. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You fear abandoning yourself more. That shift changes everything. Because once self-abandonment becomes intolerable, authenticity becomes non-negotiable. There is still solitude in your life. But it no longer feels like exile. It feels like space. Space that protects your inner world. Space that allows depth to expand. Space that filters who can enter. You didn't lose warmth. You refined it. You didn't become distant. You became intentional. And the people who now sit across from you in cafes, in quiet rooms, in meaningful conversation, are not there because you were easy to reach. They are there because you were worth the effort. But here is the final quiet truth. Becoming hard to reach is not the end of transformation. It is only the threshold. Because the deeper question remains. Now that you are no longer performing for connection, who are you becoming in the silence?